Sarah Ferguson is back in the headlines again. And this time, not for her charity work, not for a royal engagement, but for her spending. Lavish, unapologetic, and staggering in scale. The Duchess of York, once exiled from royal grace, appears to have stepped right back into the same glittering chaos that once brought her down. Insiders say it's classic Fergie. The comeback, the charm, and the bills. She loves the thrill of being in the spotlight. One longtime royal aide told the Mail. But she's addicted to a lifestyle she can't afford. For decades, Sarah Ferguson has been a paradox, a woman half loved, half loathed by the establishment. Divorced from Prince Andrew, yet still living under his roof at Royal Lodge. Cut off from royal funds, yet somehow always photographed stepping out of private jets, attending elite parties, and wearing the kind of couture that even senior royals wouldn't dare expense. The question tonight, where does the money come from? After years of promises to reform and simplify her life, Fergie's financial habits appear unchanged. From £3,000 handbags to £10,000 retreats in Swiss spas, the Duchess has maintained a taste for the high life. Friends describe her as generous to a fault. Critics call her reckless. And according to leaked financial records obtained by one tabloid, Sarah Ferguson's personal debt has quietly ballooned into the millions. A former royal staff member told our producers, "The Duchess never really understood the concept of a budget. When she was married, there was always a private secretary or an equerry sorting out the details. After the divorce, that disappeared, but the spending didn't." Sources say Fergie relies heavily on wealthy friends and benefactors who fund everything from luxury holidays to household renovations. One insider bluntly put it, "There's always someone paying for Sarah. That's how it's always been." And yet, the Duchess seems unfazed. On social media, she posts cheery clips from her Story Time with Fergie and Friends YouTube channel, talking about kindness and resilience. But behind the scenes, royal correspondents whisper that her finances are in freefall. A former banker close to the York family revealed that multiple overdue invoices have been quietly settled by associates abroad. Her defenders insist it's all blown out of proportion. "She's been through so much," said a friend from her publishing circle. "She's a survivor, and she's finally earning her own money." That claim may have some truth. Fergie has written more than 30 books, including children's stories and memoirs. But publishing insiders note that few of those titles have brought significant profit. It's not the first time questions have surrounded the Duchess's money. In the late 1992, she was nearly bankrupt after a string of failed business ventures and unpaid taxes. The Queen herself reportedly stepped in with a discreet bailout, though Buckingham Palace has never confirmed the amount. By 2010, Fergie's net worth was described as chaotic, with debts across multiple countries and assets tied up in dubious partnerships. And yet, somehow, she always bounces back. "She's the comeback queen," says one royal commentator. "Every time she's written off, she finds a way to reappear, sometimes through charity work, sometimes through the media. But it's always the same story. Charm, chaos, and checks that someone else has to cover." A recent observers believe the problem isn't malice, but impulse. Sarah Ferguson has long described herself as emotionally generous. Those who've worked with her interpret that differently. When she's happy, she spends. When she's anxious, she spends. It's like her coping mechanism, says a former aide. Her critics, however, are less forgiving. One royal biographer called her the Duchess of Excess, a title that stuck after a 2019 profile detailing her penchant for luxury gifts, bespoke jewelry, and lavish private parties held during her financial recovery. The piece quoted a guest who recalled, "She was laughing, dancing, drinking champagne. It felt like nothing had changed since the 90 seconds. And maybe it hasn't, because behind the public smiles, whispers from Windsor suggest the same old pattern: mounting expenses, unpaid invoices, and the quiet expectation that somehow, someone, perhaps even Prince Andrew, will sort it all out. For a woman once beloved as the People's Duchess, the contrast couldn't be sharper. She preaches humility, but lives extravagantly. She speaks of gratitude, yet chases glamour. And in a royal era now defined by restraint and accountability, Sarah Ferguson's unapologetic opulence feels like a relic or a rebellion. Royal watchers say this latest wave of spending has left the palace uneasy. One courtier described the mood as disbelief. Another, more bluntly, "It's the same Sarah, just older. She'll never change." But if she's unfazed by scandal, the public isn't. With tabloids tracking her every handbag, holiday, and headline, the Duchess once again finds herself center stage, the embodiment of the royal paradox. Divorced, disgraced, and yet still irresistibly newsworthy. And as new documents emerge hinting at even deeper financial entanglements, one question looms. Is Fergie living beyond her means or just beyond consequence? Because tonight, one thing is clear, the Red Duchess is back, and the bills are, once again, piling up. It began with a handshake and ended with one of the most humiliating scandals in modern royal history. The year was 2010. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, was secretly filmed agreeing to sell access to her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, for £500,000. The sting operation, conducted by an undercover reporter posing as a businessman, sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and destroyed what little credibility Fergie still had left. The footage was brutal. Calm, smiling, and confident, the Duchess leaned across a London hotel table and told the man, £500,000 opens the door. Then you'll have access to Andrew. She pocketed an envelope stuffed with £40,000 in cash as a down payment. Within hours, the video was on every screen in Britain. The once-loved People's Duchess caught on tape, trading the royal brand for personal gain. Royal correspondents at the time described the palace's reaction as utter disbelief. An insider later recalled, "It wasn't just the money, it was the audacity." She didn't seem to understand the scale of what she'd done. Prince Andrew was said to be furious and humiliated, while the Queen, according to one courtier, was deeply saddened. But those who knew Fergie best weren't surprised. "Sarah always thought she could charm her way out of trouble," said one former aide. "She'd been living on borrowed grace for years. This time, the cameras caught up." In the days that followed, the Duchess gave a tearful apology on television. "I'm so sorry," she said, blaming desperation, poor judgment, and mounting debts. But few were convinced. Critics saw not remorse, but routine, the latest chapter in a long story of chaos, excuses, and financial survival. According to financial insiders, Fergie's debts at the time exceeded £4 million. Unpaid loans, unpaid staff, unpaid taxes. Her lifestyle, private jets, five-star hotels, designer wardrobes, was far beyond her means. And unlike other royals, she had no official income. Her ex-husband's support was limited, her ventures inconsistent. She was always chasing the next opportunity, one former business associate told our producers. A new sponsor, a new deal, a new investor. If you had money, she had time for you. End quote. For Sarah Ferguson, the cash for access sting was more than a tabloid disaster. It was the culmination of years of risky associations. She had been photographed with questionable financiers, attended lavish parties with oligarchs, and accepted business advice from men later charged with fraud. The sting simply revealed what insiders had whispered about for years, that the Duchess blurred the line between friendship, business, and royalty. Even in crisis, the images were surreal. Fergie leaving her London flat in oversized sunglasses, ignoring questions from the press. A police escort clearing photographers as she drove to meet her PR team. Commentators called it a royal train wreck in real time. Yet within months, she was back on American talk shows, rebranding herself as a woman who made mistakes, but learned from them. Oprah Winfrey gave her airtime. A documentary titled Finding Sarah aired on OWN, showing her visiting therapists, reflecting on self-worth, and promising to rebuild her life. The attempt at redemption was sincere, even moving, but the shadow of the sting never lifted. One royal historian put it simply, she became a cautionary tale, the Duchess who sold access, the woman who confused celebrity with legitimacy. In the palace, the fallout was immediate. Fergie was quietly excluded from official events for years. Her invitations dried up. She was not present at Prince William's wedding in 2011, a snub that spoke louder than any statement. Public sympathy was gone. Still, even as she retreated from the limelight, her spending habits continued. Invoices from stylists, travel agents, and consultants piled up. One former assistant described her as relentless. She would say, "We'll fix it later." There was never a no, only a next time. End of Her defenders insist she was exploited, that the undercover sting was predatory journalism, and that Sarah, under financial strain, had been trapped. But the damage was done. The clip still circulates online, a permanent reminder of the moment the Duchess of York turned royal privilege into a transaction. More than a decade later, the words still sting. When asked by a journalist whether she ever truly understood the consequences, Fergie replied, "I trusted the wrong people. I always have." Perhaps she's right, but trust isn't the only issue. Insiders say the scandal exposed a deeper truth, a pattern of financial recklessness, a dependence on wealthy connections, and a stubborn belief that charm could erase scandal. Even now, that belief lingers. Fergie always bounces back, says one royal watcher. She'll apologize, disappear, then reappear as if nothing happened. It's her gift and her curse. But this time, the palace wasn't amused. The sting had turned her from an eccentric ex-royal into a symbol of corruption and entitlement. And as the monarchy struggled to modernize, the Duchess of York had become the embodiment of everything King Charles would later seek to reform: indulgence, recklessness, and the illusion of untouchable privilege. The cameras had caught her once, but behind the curtains, another storm was brewing. A luxury chalet, a mountain of debt, and a new scandal waiting quietly in the snow. It was supposed to be a fresh start. A home in the Alps, privacy at last, a retreat from the chaos of London tabloids. But for Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew, the Swiss chalet in Verbier became something else entirely: a monument to extravagance, denial, and debt. In 2014, the Duke and Duchess of York purchased the property, Chalet Hallora, for a reported 18 million Swiss francs. 8 bedrooms, a heated indoor pool, a wine cellar carved into the mountain rock. Locals remember convoys of black SUVs arriving every winter, bringing assistants, stylists, and cases of Veuve Clicquot. They didn't live like ex-royalty, said one neighbor. They lived like oligarchs. The deal was structured quietly. Officially, the purchase was joint, though both Andrew and Fergie were already struggling financially. Payments were to be made in installments. But by 2020, nearly £6 million remained unpaid. The seller, French socialite Isabelle de Rouve, had waited years for the final transfer. When it never came, she sued. Court documents revealed what insiders had whispered for months: the Yorks were in over their heads. Their holiday home had become a millstone. They treated the chalet like a royal entitlement, a London financier close to the family told us. The difference was the palace wasn't footing the bill. When the lawsuit hit the press, Fergie's camp tried to downplay it. Her spokesman insisted it was a misunderstanding, but emails filed in Swiss court told a different story: repeated delays, new excuses, and promises that funds were on the way. In one message, Fergie's assistant cited unexpected financial constraints. Weeks later, she was photographed at the Monaco Grand Prix. Even after the suit, the Duchess continued to host friends in Verbier. Photographs from 2019 show her toasting guests beside the chalet's private fireplace, wearing a £3,000 ski jacket. She always said the house was her sanctuary, said a friend, but it was also her status symbol. She couldn't let it go. Financial analysts say the case epitomized a recurring pattern: high spending, low liquidity, and a belief that somehow things would work out. She operates on optimism, one former banker explained. That's wonderful for charity speeches. It's disastrous for property contracts. The media quickly seized on the irony. The same Duchess who once tearfully admitted to selling access to her ex-husband was now being accused of defaulting on a millionaire's mortgage. Tabloids splashed headlines like "From cash for access to cash for chalet" across their front pages. Royal commentators called it the sequel no one asked for. In the palace, frustration was palpable. While other royals tightened their belts amid calls for a slimmed-down monarchy, the Yorks seemed determined to prove the opposite. "Every scandal with Sarah drags the family backwards," said one royal source. "The optics are terrible, the lavish spending, the lawsuits, the excuses. It's 2020, not 1989. When the pandemic struck, attention shifted, briefly. But by late 2021, the debt dispute resurfaced. Reports emerged that the chalet was finally being sold to cover the unpaid balance. Fergie described it publicly as a business decision. Privately, friends say she was devastated. She loved that place. It was her last taste of real glamour, said an insider. She cried the day the paperwork went through. Despite the embarrassment, Sarah tried to spin the loss into another comeback. Interviews followed, portraying her as misunderstood, resilient, even thrifty. "I've learned to value simplicity," she told one lifestyle magazine. But as one former staff member dryly noted, her definition of simplicity still involves a Swiss ski lodge. The episode left more than financial damage. It reinforced a perception that Fergie was trapped in a permanent cycle of indulgence and apology. Each time she promised reform, another bill appeared. Each time she sought privacy, another photograph surfaced of luxury handbags, designer gowns, or champagne brunches. Royal historians now view the Verbier saga as the symbolic midpoint in the Duchess's long decline, the moment when sympathy turned to disbelief. People were willing to forgive mistakes, says biographer Anne Lloyd, but a multi-million-pound holiday home while pleading poverty? That tested even her most loyal supporters. For Prince Andrew, the chalet became a separate problem, one tangled with his own legal and reputational crises. For Sarah, it was emotional. It represented freedom, she once said. But freedom has a price, and in her case, the invoice was literal. By the time the debt was finally settled, reputations were beyond repair. The chalet stood empty, its pool drained, its wine cellar cleared. The Duchess had moved on to podcasts and children's books, telling audiences about gratitude and resilience. But in Switzerland, the locals still remember. She said she'd bring royalty to Verbier, one resident told us. Instead, she brought the tabloids. And as the ink dried on the sail, one unresolved question lingered over Windsor and the Alps alike. If Fergie could spend millions she didn't have, who exactly was footing the rest of the bill? Because behind the chalet doors lay another secret, one written not in snow, but in emails. Correspondence that would link the Duchess, once again, to a name the royal family hoped never to hear spoken aloud. The revelations came quietly, a leak, a headline, and then a storm. In early 2023, an archive of private emails between Sarah Ferguson and the late financier Jeffrey Epstein resurfaced. Among them, a message dated 2011, written in her own words, "You are a supreme friend. I love you and thank you." Those 8 words detonated like a grenade inside Buckingham Palace. The Duchess of York, who had long insisted she cut all ties with Epstein after his first conviction, was suddenly exposed. The emails suggested not only contact but warmth, an intimacy that defied every public statement she had made. The timing was devastating. Just as the royal family was attempting to distance itself from Prince Andrew's disastrous associations, here was Fergie, his ex-wife, his closest ally, pulled back into the same toxic orbit. "It's a nightmare repeat," said one royal insider. "Every time we try to close the chapter, she finds a way to reopen it." En effect, the correspondence painted an uncomfortable picture. In one exchange, Fergie appeared to apologize to Epstein for negative press comments, promising she had been forced to make them. Another referred to financial matters, repayment of a £15,000 debt Epstein had once covered on her behalf. He had, as she later admitted, paid off one of her personal assistants. "I abhor pedophilia," she would later declare. "I regret ever knowing him." But by then, the damage was irreversible. Charities moved swiftly. Within days of the leak, several organizations announced they were reviewing their associations with the Duchess. A children's hospice in Dorset and a cancer foundation in Manchester both confirmed they would no longer retain her as patron. The Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, which had proudly named her an ambassador, issued a terse statement citing reputational risk. From her side, the defense was familiar: misunderstanding, coercion, bad timing. Her spokesperson claimed the 2011 email had been written under duress after Epstein allegedly threatened to destroy her reputation. A source close to Ferguson described the phone call as chilling, almost Hannibal Lecter in tone. According to that account, Epstein had demanded loyalty in exchange for silence. Still, to the public, it looked like history repeating itself. Another case of poor judgment, another association with money and power gone wrong. "It doesn't matter what she meant," said a royal commentator. "What matters is that she wrote to him, after everything." For many observers, the revelation shattered what little distance the Duchess had tried to build between herself and Andrew's scandal. The two had always been portrayed as unusually close ex-spouses, sharing a home at Royal Lodge, attending family events together, and publicly supporting each other. Now, that closeness felt tainted. "The optics are disastrous," said a former courtier. "She's standing beside the man most associated with Epstein while her own name appears in the same inbox." Behind closed doors, insiders described an atmosphere of disbelief. The palace reportedly received the leaked correspondence just hours before it hit the front pages. "It was like watching the past come back to life," one senior aide told us. "We knew the Andrew problem was unsolvable, but Sarah's involvement reignited everything." The fallout was swift. Invitations evaporated, sponsorships paused, and planned media appearances were quietly shelved. Even her podcast, Tea Talks with the Duchess and Sarah, suspended new episodes for several weeks. Yet, true to form, Fergie resurfaced on social media within days, posting a quote about truth and forgiveness. "She never hides," said one journalist who has covered the Yorks for decades. "That's what makes her fascinating and infuriating. Any other royal would retreat in silence." Sarah posts a selfie. Critics, however, were less amused. "It's not naivety," one former royal advisor told our producers. "It's arrogance. She believes charm and sentiment can rewrite the record, but this isn't the 90 seconds people remember emails." The deeper concern, analysts say, is that the leak reinforced an image of moral blindness, a duchess willing to overlook monstrous behavior in exchange for financial security. There's always a justification, said historian Penny Junor. Always a reason, always an excuse. But at some point, you run out of explanations. The Epstein link, for many, marked the point of no return. Whatever sympathy Fergie had regained through charity work and motherhood evaporated overnight. The tabloids branded her the Duchess of Denial. Morning shows replayed the Supreme Friend line on loop. Twitter turned savage. And through it all, the Duchess remained defiant. "I've made mistakes," she told an interviewer weeks later. "But I'm proud of who I am. I will not be defined by others' sins." Perhaps not, but the timing could not have been worse. As King Charles pressed ahead with his vision of a leaner, cleaner monarchy, Sarah Ferguson had dragged the House of York back into the swamp. "The York brand is toxic again," said a palace source. "And this time, there's no easy apology." In the quiet corridors of Windsor, one phrase echoed among the staff: "The past doesn't die, not for the Yorks." And as the world debated Fergie's intentions, another chapter was quietly forming, one that would shift the spotlight from scandal to survival. Because behind the Duchess's chaos stood two women who had lived their entire lives in its shadow: her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. For Beatrice and Eugenie, scandal was never a choice. It was inheritance. From childhood, the daughters of Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew grew up in a world where the flash of a camera was as familiar as the sound of applause, and headlines about their parents' missteps were background noise. But in recent years, something remarkable has happened. While the Duchess of York continues to dance with controversy, her daughters have quietly rewritten their part of the York story. Observers call it the long escape. Unlike their mother, the princesses have avoided the chaos of celebrity and instead chosen something radical: normality. Beatrice, 35, now works in finance and technology ventures. Eugenie, 33, balances a career in the art world with charity work focused on anti-slavery initiatives. Both are married to successful men outside the royal system, a move seen as symbolic as it is practical. Their mother married into the monarchy. They, critics say, married out of it. Beatrice wed Edoardo Mappelli Mazzi, an Italian property developer with old money and newer ambitions. Their Cotswolds home, worth several £millions, was reportedly purchased with significant help from Edoardo's family, not the royal purse. Eugenie's husband, Jack Brooksbank, comes from a family of winemakers and now works with luxury brands. Their lifestyle is comfortable, yes, but far from the jet-set excess that defined the previous York generation. "They understand the optics," said one royal correspondent. "They know they can't flaunt privilege the way their parents did. They've learned to be discreet, something Sarah never mastered." It's not that the sisters live modestly. Their wardrobes are designer, their holidays are private, their homes immaculate. But what sets them apart is tone. There are no paparazzi outbursts, no tabloid sting operations, no leaked emails. When they appear in public, it's usually at charity galas or low-profile family events. Smiling, polished, deliberate. They've inherited their mother's warmth, one former courtier told our producers, but not her chaos. Thank God. Still, the York shadow lingers. Beatrice and Eugenie are never entirely free of their surname. Every story about them inevitably circles back to Andrew and Fergie, to Epstein, to the chalet, to the scandals that refuse to die. "It's unfair," says a family friend. "They've done nothing wrong." But in this family, guilt is hereditary. Public perception remains split. Some see the sisters as privileged beneficiaries of a system that should have left them behind when Charles slimmed down the monarchy. Others view them as modern women trying to balance duty, motherhood, and independence. What's undeniable is that both have chosen stability, marriages grounded in private sector success rather than royal obligation. Royal commentators have even suggested that King Charles views them as potential assets. "He knows optics matter," one insider said. "William and Catherine can't do everything. Beatrice and Eugenie might quietly fill the gaps as long as they keep clean." But keeping clean in the House of York is easier said than done. The Epstein saga still casts a long shadow over their father. Their mother's financial dramas remain a media obsession. Each new revelation about Fergie threatens to undo years of quiet rebuilding. "They're walking a tightrope," says historian Anna Pasternak. Every time their mother makes headlines, they lose control of their own narrative. The sisters' defenders argue they've already proven themselves. Eugenie's charity work on human trafficking has earned international praise. Beatrice's advocacy for dyslexia awareness has touched thousands of families. Both women, in contrast to their mother, have built reputations for responsibility and empathy. They've modernized the York name, says one royal analyst. They're doing what Sarah couldn't, living royal values without the royal paycheck. At home, insiders say the relationship with their mother remains loving but pragmatic. They adore her, said a close family friend, but they don't copy her. They've learned that sympathy doesn't erase accountability. Beatrice in particular is said to act as the family diplomat, calm, measured, and protective of the York legacy. She's the peacemaker, another source told us. She knows when to smile and when to say nothing. For a family so often defined by its noise, silence has become the daughter's greatest strength. And yet, even in their restraint, they cannot escape the gravitational pull of the past. A recent charity event in London saw photographers shouting questions about the Epstein emails as Eugenie walked the red carpet. She smiled politely, said nothing, and kept moving. The clip went viral, a reminder that dignity, too, can be a performance. There's a quiet irony to it all. Sarah Ferguson once called herself the People's Duchess, but in 2025, it's her daughters who embody that title, women of privilege who seem to understand the boundaries their mother never could. Still, the story isn't over. The Duchess remains a presence, charming and volatile, ever ready for one more reinvention. Insiders say she's been working on another memoir, one that promises truth, redemption, and the courage to be misunderstood. For Beatrice and Eugenie, that means another round of headlines, another chapter they didn't write, but will inevitably have to live through, because in the House of York, no one ever really escapes the family plot. And as the monarchy itself shifts under King Charles's reformist gaze, one final question looms. If the daughters represent renewal, what does their mother represent now? The answer lies not in redemption, but in reckoning. And it begins with the woman once called the People's Duchess, now standing alone, facing the monarchy she can never quite rejoin. Sarah Ferguson knows how to survive. She's done it for nearly 4 decades, through divorce, disgrace, bankruptcy, and scandal. Yet in 2025, the Duchess of York finds herself in unfamiliar territory. Irrelevant. Not exiled, not redeemed. Just out of place. Her world has changed, but her habits haven't. While King Charles trims the monarchy into something leaner and more dignified, Sarah remains a relic of another age. One of excess, publicity, and endless second chances. She's the last Duchess of the old world, says one royal historian. A generation that believed charm could erase consequence. Today, Fergie still lives at Royal Lodge in Windsor, the same estate she shares, awkwardly, with her disgraced ex-husband, Prince Andrew. Officially, they're just friends. Unofficially, they're inseparable. It's a strange symbiotic relationship, says a palace aide. Neither can afford to leave, financially or emotionally. She continues to reinvent herself. Podcaster, author, motivational speaker. Her latest project, a series of children's books about courage, has been described by critics as well-meaning but self-referential. On her social media, she posts daily affirmations about kindness, self-worth, and forgiveness. It's her trademark, the language of survival dressed in pastel optimism. But behind the smiles, the cracks show. Her reputation within royal circles is exhausted. There's sympathy for her health battles, but no patience for her antics, says a senior royal correspondent. She's tolerated, not embraced. Even her invitations to family gatherings are selective, welcome at minor events, invisible at major ones. Camilla's circle, insiders note, views her with thinly veiled disdain. They see Sarah as a walking headline, one source said. The king prefers quiet loyalty. She brings noise. The contrast is stark. While the queen consort embodies discretion, the Duchess of York remains addicted to visibility. If there's a camera, she'll find it, another insider quipped. Financially, she insists she's stable. She's given interviews about learning to manage money and living simply. Yet recent filings from one of her ventures suggest continuing losses. Her team denies any trouble, but former business associates describe a revolving door of advisors and unpaid consultants. The patterns, they say, are old and unchanged. Still, for all her flaws, Sarah Ferguson refuses to vanish. Her resilience fascinates even her critics. She's indestructible, one commentator admitted. Every time you think she's finished, she resurfaces with a book, a podcast, or a new best friend in Hollywood. Her daughters remain her saving grace. Beatrice and Eugenie, by most accounts, have managed the impossible, keeping the York name alive without drowning in it. They give her legitimacy, said a former palace press officer. They're the bridge between the chaos of their parents and the calm of the next generation. And yet, even through them, the shadow lingers. Every photograph of Fergie attending a family event reignites the same old questions. Why is she still around? Why won't the palace finally cut her loose? The answer, it seems, lies in the peculiar loyalty of royal blood. She may embarrass them, says a courtier, but she's still one of them, and that's the problem. Public opinion has softened, but not forgotten. Many now view her with a mix of nostalgia and exasperation. The scandals have faded into legend, yet the image remains: the red-haired duchess, laughing too loudly, spending too freely, forever chasing approval that never quite arrives. A few weeks ago, she appeared on morning television, smiling brightly under studio lights. "I've found peace," she said. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The host nodded politely. Viewers weren't so sure. Online comments summed it up best. She never changes, but we've stopped expecting her to. As the broadcast ended, footage rolled of her leaving the studio, waving to fans, signing a book, posing for one last photo. Old instincts, unbreakable. And perhaps that's the truth about Sarah Ferguson. She's not the villain, not the victim, but the reminder of what the monarchy used to be before consequence became fashionable. A duchess born for attention in an era that no longer forgives it. Because every royal story needs its cautionary tale. And in this new age of restraint, Sarah Ferguson remains exactly that. The last Duchess of Indulgence, smiling through scandal, unbowed by time. The cameras may turn away, the palaces may move on, but somewhere in Windsor, behind the iron gates of Royal Lodge, the Red Duchess still rehearses her next comeback. And for the royal family, and for Britain, that may be the most dangerous headline of all.